Hello and welcome from the World Economic Forum. My name is Adrian Monk. Welcome to this briefing on the 51st annual meeting of the World Economic Forum. Traditionally, that meeting takes place in Davos, Switzerland, but this year is a little different. It will be a virtual Davos, bringing the world together online. Joining me here in the studio in Geneva, I have the president of the World Economic Forum, Birger Brender, my colleagues Sadia Zahidi and Dominic Warre from New York. We're joined by Sarita Nayar. And with us in a studio, we have Professor Klaus Schwab, founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, who can give us the context to this year's very special and very different meeting. Klaus.
Good morning and good afternoon. 2021 will be crucial. It will be a pivotal year for the future of humankind. It will be crucial because we have to continue to fight the virus, but we have to move out of the pandemic and we have to create sound economic growth, which is more resilient, more inclusive, and more sustainable. But what we have to do above all is to restore trust in our world. Trust is needed in order to overcome the crisis, but trust is needed as a base to have a future-oriented mind and to construct the world for tomorrow. There are two requirements for restoring trust. First, we have to substantially reinforce global cooperation again. And second, we have to engage all stakeholders into the solution of the problems we face. And here we have to engage particularly business. For this reason, I'm so happy to say that, like in the previous year, the global leadership from all walks of life is coming together in the forthcoming Davos Agenda Week. What we do is we launch a process to build the future. The first step is the Davos Agenda Week, starting next Monday. And the purpose of this week is to take stock, to look at the state of the world, to exchange visions and ideas, and to show directions. But then, late May, we will have the first in-person global summit taking place in Singapore. But we also have all our task forces, multiple task forces, which have met over 300 times in the last months. And also, we organized 2 preparatory summits for this Davos Agenda Week. We have defined 5 policy areas, and of course, they are all interconnected. First, driving responsible industry transformation. Business finally is moving to accept the stakeholder principle. And we will publish at the beginning of next week a book on stakeholder capitalism, and the subtitle is A Global Economy That Works for Progress, People and the Planet. The second policy area which we will address is enhancing global stewardship. And here we will focus particularly also in view COP26 on the climate crisis and on moving to a carbon-free, carbon-zero world. The third area is designing fair economic and social systems. And here, one of the gravity centers of our efforts is, of course, the future of jobs, how to create decent livelihoods for everybody. The fourth area is technologies for good. And the fifth is global cooperation. How can we create a multilateral system which is more inclusive, which is adapted to the needs of the 21st century? I would call it the multilateral system 4.0. In summary, 2021 is a decisive year to recreate trust, but trust requires progress in addressing all the challenges we are confronted with. The forum as a public-private platform to catalyze and also to facilitate and to advance this process in fighting COVID and shaping a more peaceful and prosperous post-corona era is putting all its efforts behind making this process consisting of the Davos Agenda Week, our task forces, and Singapore a success. Thank you.
Klaus, thank you very much. This meeting will be the first opportunity for global leaders to come together in 2021 and look at the big issues that are facing the world in this critical year. Birger, could you tell us a little more about who we're expecting and give us some of the context on those leaders who will be attending this Davos Virtual Agenda Week?
Thank you very much, Adrian. Thank you also very much to Professor Klaus Schwab, our founder and executive chairman, underlining so strongly that what we want to achieve during our Davos Agenda Week is to rebuild trust. And I am sure that we also have the right key people and leaders in the world coming together next week to address these really pressing issues. We know that we are all in the same boat and we have to collaborate to really make progress. Look at COVID. COVID anywhere is COVID everywhere. And to open the first day in the afternoon, we have the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, addressing the Davos Agenda Week, looking at how we can strengthen multilateralism in a world that is, of course, polarized and where we have geopolitical challenges. We will also have Dr. Tedros from WHO showing us the way forward in fighting the pandemic. And we practically have all the key leaders of the international organizations. We will have then UNEP, UN Environment, addressing climate change. We'll have UNDP, UNICEF, and we will really see how we can work together to overcome the challenges. We also know that we are faced with the 3 C's: COVID, climate, and cooperation, lack of cooperation. And we know that this year is a year where Asia takes on 50% of the global GDP. Asia has 50% of also the global population. And this year, President Xi Jinping of China will be back in the Davos Agenda Week. He addressed Davos in 2017. But in addition to Xi Jinping, we have the key leaders from Asia. We have Prime Minister Suga of Japan, the 3rd largest economy in the world. We also have Prime Minister Modi from India, the largest democracy in the world. We have President Moon from South Korea. So we will have a very thorough discussion also on the role that Asia will play in a recovery of also the global economy. We know here in Europe, we are not out of the woods yet. We are faced still with 2nd or 3rd wave of COVID. We also know that the recovery is taking time. We will have Chancellor Merkel with us to discuss this, and also President Macron, and of course Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, together also with other key European leaders, Prime Minister Sanchez from Spain, and also the Prime Minister from Greece. This is also the year when Italy takes over the G20 presidency. And we know that G20 will play a major role in getting us out of this crisis. So Prime Minister Conte will address also the Davos Agenda Week, also with other key G20 leaders from all over the world. For example, special address from President Ramaphosa from Africa. We'll also have President of Ghana, President of Rwanda, and also very strong voices from Latin America with President Fernandez from Argentina, G20, President Duque from Colombia, Costa Rica, etc. So we'll come together and also look at all these pressing issues and see how we can collaborate better. And we know also that the Middle East plays a crucial role in this, and also in a humanitarian context. We will have then King of Jordan, King Abdullah. We will also have Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu addressing us. He will also share his experience now with rolling out the vaccine. So we will have the key people to achieve building trust and also moving into a sustainable recovery phase. In addition to these leaders, we also are in dialogue with other G20, G7 leaders in the days to come. And we will, on top of it, have 100 key ministers with foreign affairs portfolio, finance minister portfolio, and governors from central banks. So this will be the key opening of this year and enhancing the recovery out of the crisis. Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you, Børge. I want to turn now to Sadia Zahidi. Sadia, you head all of our work on the economy and society, and there's probably no bigger challenge to leaders this year than jobs. How can they preserve them? How can they create them? What can they do to prepare people for the emerging jobs of the fourth industrial revolution? Can you tell us how that will be addressed this week in Davos Agenda Week?
Thank you, Adrian. As you mentioned, the jobs of the future will come in part from the fourth industrial revolution, from the technology sector, but they will also come from the green economy, from the education sector, and from the care economy. However, to get to those jobs of the future, there are three big areas that we need to tackle. One is where will future growth come from and how we can shape it. Two, to ensure that people have the right kinds of skills and education to be able to move into those jobs of the future. And three, to ensure that this future economy and these future jobs are fair and just and available to everybody. Those are the three big areas that we've been working on over the course of 2020. You'll see much of those conversations come together at Davos Agenda Week next week. And then much of this will continue in task forces and action groups over the course of 2021. Let me give you a few highlights. One big aspect is the future of economic growth. We cannot simply return to growth as it existed in the past. We have to ensure that it's the kind of growth that endogenizes, that builds into it a focus on sustainability and on inclusion. We launched just last month a new vision for competitiveness, and you'll see much of that dialogue come together next week to see how practically do we get to this new kind of dashboard for the economy that looks not just at GDP numbers, but also at inclusion and sustainability targets. And over the course of the year, we'll be working with multiple economies on this. A second area is around skills. Last year, some of you may recall, we launched the Reskilling Revolution, aiming to reach 1 billion people with better skills by 2030. Over the course of the last year, we worked with 10 economies, 1,000 companies, and reached 65 million people. This is just a start, and obviously this work will be scaled in 2021, and you'll see at least 3 sessions that tackle this across multiple geographies next week. And then finally, embedding social justice across the economy, ensuring that women have equal chances in the economic recovery, ensuring that people with disabilities, people from the LGBTI community, and others are included. One big part of this will be a major initiative on racial justice led by business And 30 major companies will be coming together to make an announcement next week as to how they will embed racial justice, not just into their own workforces, but by using their businesses more globally. So Adrian, few highlights there, and much of this work to be continued over the course of the year.
Sadia, thank you very much. And this year, besides the challenges of a pandemic, of the economic need to get people back to work, one of the big challenges on government's agendas is the climate and addressing climate change. That's going to come to the fore right at the end of the year with a big international meeting dedicated to looking at that. But this meeting that we're hosting next week, Dominic, is going to be a step on that road. Can you tell us a bit more about the forum's work on climate and the role that Davos Agenda will play in driving forward some of the action on climate change?
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. I'd be delighted to. You're absolutely right. It is, as the theme of the Davos Agenda says, a crucial year for climate action. It's been an optimistic year in some senses. 126 countries have now made what they call net zero commitments in line with the science. That's about 53% of global greenhouse gas emissions. The challenge is, how do we get where we need to get to by 2030? How do we focus on a decade of delivery? And that really is a theme that runs through the Davos Agenda Week. Industry, heavy industry, accounts for about 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions that need to be abated. These are key sectors like cement and steel and chemicals and automobiles and trucks, things like that. And we're delighted to see huge momentum in an initiative we call Mission Possible, It Can Be Done, that has grown from 30 companies to over 200 companies and investors and other stakeholders that will look to create sector investment plans to drive down emissions to net zero in those areas. That will be on the menu for next week at Davos Agenda. We're also delighted in the broader political momentum that is taking shape. I mentioned all those net zero plans. With the US elections, everyone is very excited to see a different take from the United States, and I'm delighted to say that the special envoy for the President, Secretary John Kerry, will be making some remarks about the US position on climate change. We also have great representation from across Asia, as our President had mentioned already, from South Korea and from Japan. Nature is the other big dimension. It's not just about industry and energy. Scientists reckon that 30% of all the carbon we need to capture can be done so if we have a more nature-positive economy. And there are win-wins in a nature-positive economy: more jobs, better improved livelihoods, better ecosystems. We have a great session with leaders from the Amazon region, including the Vice President of Brazil and the President of Colombia and the President of the Inter-American Development Bank, to discuss the sustainable development future of the Amazon, and many other key sessions on nature and how one might build carbon markets that can help channel finance from climate into nature in the right way with the right kinds of rules, which is very important for poorer countries, particularly as COVID has created more debt in many places, and future forms of finance are very important to find. So those are some of the highlights which will set off the year towards the climate COP. And I'm delighted that the World Economic Forum will be working very closely with the COP presidency, with the United Nations, and with other key stakeholders across the public-private domain to drive forward an action agenda into COP and for the decade ahead, where Singapore, our special annual meeting in May, will play a key role. Thanks, Adrian.
Thanks, Dominic. Business has featured recently in a poll as the most trusted sector of society in comparison to organizations, in comparison to governments. Our business representation at the forum, we're a business member organization. Sarita Nayar, can you tell us a little bit about business participation in the Davos Agenda Week and why it's so important?
Yes, thank you, Adrian, and good morning and good afternoon from New York. As was just mentioned, business is a critical stakeholder, playing a very active role to solve the complex issues that were just mentioned by many of my colleagues. And business leaders have partnered with us all through 2020 to bring innovative solutions and expedite implementation. During the Davos Agenda Week, over 1,000 business leaders will work on and highlight many of these initiatives. I too would like to share 3 initiatives with you that have been led by business. First is the COVID Action Platform. And as Børge mentioned, early last year, as the pandemic unfolded, disrupting lives and livelihoods, we were quick in creating the COVID Action Platform, where business leaders from all sectors came together. And this cross-industry group supported the fastest, the most coordinated, and successful global effort in history to develop tools to fight a difficult disease. This effort was part of the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator in partnership with WHO, and it included facilitating rapid, large-scale manufacturing of vaccines. More recently, the forum has engaged the transportation and logistics companies to support UNICEF and COVAX countries have fast and widespread distribution of vaccines. And while the pandemic is, of course, still front and center and remains a priority, our health platform is also focused on some other health issues, one of which is Alzheimer's. There are close to 10 million new cases of dementia globally each year. There is an urgent need for the type of collective action witnessed during the COVID-19 pandemic. And during this virtual week, global CEO initiatives on Alzheimer's disease will advance much needed collaboration to develop new diagnostics and treatments. Second, look out next week for an announcement of an innovative alliance on digital infrastructure. Digital connectivity has been a critical tool in our ability to work, to educate our children, and basically lives our lives through this pandemic. However, nearly half the world still does not have access to the internet. So this alliance, in partnership with business, is an ambitious initiative to accelerate achieving universal access by connecting the digital infrastructure of the 21st century to critical sectors of the economy. And third, our business partners are creating a vision to achieve the net zero carbon future in cities to create positive outcomes for the environment, the economy, and human health. We just heard from Dominic about the criticality of net zero work. Cities account for nearly 2/3 of the emissions on our planet. And in order to keep the global temperature increases within the 1.5 degrees or below, cities need to achieve net zero emission by mid-century. By taking a holistic approach across multiple sectors, cities can reduce their carbon emission, create jobs, and enable people to lead healthier lives. These and many more initiatives will be showcased during the Davos week. So over 1,000 business leaders across all industry sectors will be working during this week to catalyze action and to scale up these initiatives. They'll be inviting others to join them in helping to create a better future for all of humanity. And these executives are not only involved in our programs this week, but also work with us all year round and with each other. And they work on developing the solutions to these complex issues that require collaboration and action. I'm very pleased to say that over 500 CEOs and chairmen are joining us during this week, and they will be advancing the project works that we've discussed. They are showing extraordinary level of commitment to drive responsible industry transformation and growth. We are excited to welcome them next week. Thank you.
Sarita, thank you very much for that. We've got time for questions, and if you have questions, please pop them into the function on Zoom, and we'll be able to take them here in the studio and online. We have some questions already lined up, and I want to go first to Suzanne Biedenkopf from ZDF in Germany. Suzanne, your question.
Yes, thank you very much, and hello from Mainz. Thank you for the opportunity. I have 2 questions. My first question would be, Professor Schwab, could you have imagined a year ago when you celebrated 50 years of World Economic Forum that the World Economic Forum would go virtual this year? So that's question 1. And the second question is, to me, the forum stands for networking and the opportunity to hold high-level talks, to reach agreements also in the shortest possible time. And engagement is one of the key features of the forum. The outstanding opportunity to meet high-ranking personalities in person. Can this spirit of Davos be transferred in the virtual world? So will, in the future, content maybe be more important than contacts?
Thank you very much for that, Suzanne. Klaus, turning to you, when you started the forum in 1971, did you imagine that one day it would be taking place virtually? And has that changed the nature of the spirit of Davos?
No, nobody could have envisioned what happened. We were practically the last global summit which took place in person. But I have to say I'm really encouraged by our partners. We have more partners now than we had at the beginning of the crisis, which shows that the partners are not just interested in networking and contact and creating contacts, but they really want to engage. And we have been so much, let's say, impressed by the engagement level of our partner companies, and as I said, even more partner companies joining us in the last months. Related, I mean, engaging into all the different activities which have been described by my colleagues. But of course, networking is also important, and the person-to-person contacts are important to create even a higher level of trust. And that's the reason why we supplement the Davos Agenda Week also with the Singapore meeting, which will be the first, again, in-person summit in the world. But there is another difference. In Davos, we take stock of all the results of our task forces. We present them, and in Singapore, we really want to present solutions. We cannot forget, after Singapore, we have the G7 meeting, which will take place only 2 weeks afterwards. We have the G20 meeting, and we have the COP26 meeting. So we want to make a useful, productive contribution to the global interaction where everybody has to be engaged.
Thank you, Klaus. I think we can go to London now to Juliet Mann from CGTN. Juliet.
Unmute.
And Juliet, you need to unmute yourself to ask your question.
I beg your pardon. Thank you.
Thanks.
Shall I go from the top? You talked about the 3 C's, COVID, climate, and cooperation. So what do you hope to see when it comes to trade and cooperation with the new Biden administration?
Thanks for that, Juliet. Perhaps I can turn to my colleague Birger Brender to pick that question up.
Thank you so much. We know that the Biden administration has already announced that they will be re-entering into the Paris Agreement. I guess that will happen during the inauguration speech on Wednesday. On COVID, President-elect has also strongly underlined the importance of wearing a mask, but also rolling out the vaccination and also collaboration. On the trade issue, there will be necessary to really enhance global trade again, to really accelerate economic growth, to really come back as soon as possible to the pre-COVID level when it comes to the global GDP. Trade plays a very important role. That doesn't mean that all the trade challenges in the world will be solved overnight. There are still issues between the G2, and there is also then very interesting in the coming months to see if WTO will again get executive director here in Geneva.
Thanks for that, Birger. I think we can go now to Germany and Thorsten Rieker from Handelsblatt. Thorsten,
yes,
we have your question.
Yes, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for the opportunity. Professor Schwab, you talked a lot about trust and regaining trust. So the pandemic has accelerated the profound decline in trust in governments and top executives and the media. They all lost their credibility. The only business as an institution remains trusted and is taking over ever more global challenges like gatekeeping the endemic flow of information, fighting COVID, or saving the planet from climate change. So I wondered, should companies take over here and be the fifth estate as part of the great reset you are proposing? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. They should really contribute and to take a very active role. We have seen with the COVID crisis what some people call a stronger role which is played by governments. But we also have to see a much stronger engagement of business. We wouldn't be in the fight against the virus where we are today, with vaccines developed after such a short time, with, let's say, digitalization, allowing business still to keep running. So all the key word is cooperation. We need collaborative efforts between governments and business. It's not an either or, it's an and. Business and governments, and I would add, and society. And let's not forget, the Forum has a community of 12,000 global shapers, young leaders in over 400 cities in the age between 20 and 30. I think if we want to have a forward-oriented approach, we have to engage all stakeholders, but particularly also the young generation in the definition of the answers to our challenges.
Thank you, Klaus. I think we can go now to Singapore and Shefali Reki from the Straits Times. Shefali, what's your question?
Hi everyone. I had two questions. I'm keen to know more about your plans for the Singapore meet. Is there a guiding theme already for the Singapore meet? And how do you see the Singapore meeting building on the Davos agenda meet that is happening? Also, would you be able to give us a sense of how many people you're expecting here in Singapore? Will Marina Bay Sands be the venue for the meeting? And is this going to replace your ASEAN meet? My second question is for Professor Schwab. If you could tell us, how do you expect the pandemic to reorder our lives in coming decades?
Shefali, thank you. That was a lot of questions in the first question, and perhaps best place to tackle that first one is Birger Brender, who's going to be heading to Singapore after the Davos Agenda Week is finished. Birger, how do we see the Singapore meeting shaping up in the context of all this year's proceedings?
We're very much looking forward to coming together physically in Singapore. Our plan is to start on the 25th of May. Already a lot of interest from key governmental leaders, but also key business leaders. And I think we also in Singapore have to address this question of trust and confidence, but also the three C's, Covet, and also climate change and cooperation. And we will, based on our Davos Agenda Week, we will form several task forces that will come up with recommendations to the Singapore meeting, how we can break the impasses that we are faced with in many of these sectors. And also, as mentioned before, from many, we know that governments have launched 12 trillion US dollars in stimulus, and there is limited muscles left now fiscally. And to really succeed on the sustainable development goals, we also have to mobilize private sector in addition. And as the International Organization for Public-Private Cooperation, I don't think no one is better positioned than the World Economic Forum in Singapore to really make sure that we do achieve really concrete results in these areas. And we know that also Singapore has the facilities to do so. We put health and safety at the forefront, and we also have good discussions on the best venue and making sure that all our participants will be safe.
Thanks for that, Birger. And Shefali, in answer to your question about the future, perhaps that's a very obvious cue, Klaus, for you to talk about your new book, Stakeholder Capitalism, which is hitting bookstores online and in real life this week.
I think it's absolutely crucial that when we look at our future, we see our future not only in economic terms. We are committed to take, particularly after the crisis now and after having experienced how COVID destroyed livelihoods, that we are also have to pay sufficient attention to all our social aspects, to well-being, not just GDP, but well-being, to resilience, to inclusion. So, and second, of course, we have to pay, as it was mentioned before, much more attention to preserve our planet. And that's the reason why I have written this book, Stakeholder Capitalism, a global economy that works for progress, economic progress, people, and the planet. And it's translated into business language by stakeholder capitalism, which means that business should not only serve shareholders, should not be only aiming at short-term profits, but should integrate also social, environmental, and good governance objectives in what it is doing. And I think we are just now at a turning point. Business is embracing the stakeholder capitalism concept.
Klaus, thank you very much. I think we can go to BBC News now. And Karishma, do we have you online for your question? I think we just have your audio.
Yes.
We can hear you. Thanks. Go ahead.
Karishma from the BBC, thank you so much for organizing this briefing, and you've got a very impressive lineup for the virtual Davos next week. Just picking up on what Shefali said, how much of a lineup are you expecting at the Singapore in-person Davos? How different will it be? And given that there are worries about another wave in many parts of Asia, around the world as well, how much is that impacting your plans for an in-person meet if travel restrictions continue? And one final one, you mentioned that John Kerry would be representing the US next week. Can we expect US representation at the Singapore Davos at the presidential level, Joe Biden, or at the vice presidential level? What are your plans for that?
Thanks for that. Birger, can I perhaps turn to you on that? How confident are you and your colleagues about the capacity of that Singapore meeting to address the issues that were outlined there? And perhaps also, who can we expect to see in Singapore in May to push forward some of the things that we're going to be talking about in Davos Agenda Week next Monday?
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for what you said about Davos Agenda Week that you're very excited about next week. We, of course, expect the same kind of turnout to our physical meeting in Singapore, of course, provided that the health and safety of our participant can be upheld. We have very, very good cooperation here with the Singapore government. As we know, they also have been one of the governments that have handled the COVID-19 crisis the very best. And what we would like to see this meeting is also, as already mentioned, its crucial role in also preparing the agenda for G20, G7, and the COP26 later on climate change. And where we feel and where we got really a lot of feedback also from head of states and governments from G7 and G20 economists is that we will need to mobilize business in the run-up to these meetings. So the Singapore meeting, I think, will be a really working meeting, rolling up the sleeves, looking at the most pressing issues and seeing how we can, in collaboration between governments, business, and civil society, push the envelope and see how we can then achieve more ambitious targets in many of these areas that are already mentioned.
Thanks for that, Birger. Maybe I could just bring in Dominic Warre here on the climate piece. How are you going to bring that climate conversation forward in Singapore?
Thanks, Adrian. It's a great question that was posed, and it goes back to the flavor, I think, of the World Economic Forum's mobilization across this year, that these events are moments in time to drive progress and impact towards some of the key challenges that we face. I mentioned at Davos Agenda that we'd be engaging business in the mobilization towards COP. I'm delighted to say that mobilization will continue with some special meetings in Singapore with the UK COP presidency and, of course, with others from the UN family, particularly to maintain momentum across Asia in terms of that net zero commitment. There is, of course, another big meeting this year, which is on food. There's a food systems summit in September, which the United Nations are holding. And again, I'm delighted to say that from discussions in Davos Agenda Week on how partnership across innovators, technology, investment, and companies working with farmers and civil society can move forward the agenda on food. There will also be some very good discussions in Singapore en route to the big summit. And of course, with some of the commitments that Singapore itself has made on food security by 2030, this will be a very pertinent discussion for Singapore itself.
Dominic, thank you very much. I'm going to go now to Agence France Presse and Yves Zeftel. Yves, can we have your question, please?
Yes, thank you very much. I have a question regarding the risk facing the economy. There is actually plenty of liquidity spilled by central banks injected into the economy. And don't you fear that it could lead to the formation of bubbles? I mean, stock market bubbles, real estate bubbles, and at the risk of not only aggravating inequalities, but also creating a systemic crisis as emerged 10 years ago.
Thanks, Eva. I just want to turn, if I may, to the leader of our economic work, Sadia Zahidi. Sadia, how do you view that question from Eve?
Thanks, Eva, for your question. I think it depends on the time frame that you look at. In the short term, we do need this kind of support from central banks, and we do need the stimulus from multiple finance ministries around the world, the trillions of dollars that they've injected into the economy. And that's needed because in the short term, that is the only way to prevent what you're talking about, which is inequality. We have to ensure that small and medium-sized businesses get the support that they need, households get the support that they need, and as many jobs as possible are preserved through this key crisis moment. And for the moment, financial systems have held up very well in the face of this crisis. What you're talking about is looking out a few years later. There's going to be a rise in debt of governments. There's going to be possible concerns around asset price bubbles. And those are all very valid concerns, but we have to move through the crisis and at the same time ensure that we build in resilience and soundness into the broader financial markets. And I think that work is underway at the same time. It's part of what we are looking at as well through our work on competitiveness and a new vision for economic growth, revival, and transformation. And stay tuned tomorrow for the Global Risks Report launch that actually tries to look at what happens in the next couple of years, what the possible risks may be 3 to 5 years out, including, of course, asset bubbles, and then 5 to 10 years out, the big existential threats such as climate change.
Thank you very much, Sadia. We can go to Denmark now and to Kjeld Louis. Kjeld Louis, your question, please. I think we need you to unmute yourself. Looks like we've got a slight microphone problem for Kjeld there in Denmark. So we can perhaps go to Al Arabiya and Jamil Shad.
Yes, good to see you all in good health. This is Jamil Shad from UOL, Brazil. My question is about Latin America, badly hit by the pandemic. How do you think a recovery could happen in such a vulnerable region of the world? And just a clarification, if I may, will President Bolsonaro be there? If not, what do you expect to hear from Mr. Mourão regarding the Amazon? Thank you very much.
Thanks for that. I think as you heard from Burger earlier, there's going to be a very strong presence from Latin America. And Burger, perhaps you could talk a little bit about Brazil's participation. We had President Bolsonaro in person in Davos in 2020. How that looks this year, and also perhaps some of the regional issues that the question addressed.
No, thank you so much. We never have a press conference before Davos without questions from you on Latin America. Very happy to have them. The forum has the aspiration of being as Latin American as we're European and North American. I think the participation this year also confirms this. I'm very happy, as I said, that President Fernandez of Argentina, G20, also member, will lay out his vision for his country that has also been struggling with very much economic challenges. As you mentioned, this time Brazil has chosen to send the vice president to our Davos Agenda Week, but also key ministers. Minister of Economy, we know, is crucial in the formation of their policy. And I'm so happy to see that key countries around the Amazon, like President Duque, Vice President of Brazil, but also ministers from all over the world, will gather in this discussion about the future of the rainforest and the Amazon. Also, Costa Rica, we know, is a thought leader in this field when it comes to nature. The president, also a young global leader at the World Economic Forum, will be there to discuss. But as you mentioned, the underlying issue is that Latin America has been severely hit by the pandemic. We know it is the most unequal continent before the crisis. This inequality has increased during the crisis. So it is crucial to find a path to recover growth, but it really also has to trickle down to the millions that are really badly hit. And as we know, and this is also something we will address during the Davos Agenda Week, this is the first time in 2 decades where we see extreme poverty is again growing globally. Between 50 to 100 million people ended up in that category last year. And here we have all a big responsibility to see how the growth and the recovery can also be inclusive enough.
Thanks, Burger. Perhaps we can go back to Denmark now and Carl Louis. Hoping we can go back to Carl Louis in Denmark, if he's unmuted. No, the technical, unfortunately, Denmark is off the menu thanks to a technical problem. We can, however, go to Channel News Asia. So can we dial Channel News Asia up?
Hello.
Hello. Your question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for holding this news conference. It's been very informative. And of course, being here in Singapore, I will have to follow up with questions about the Singapore meeting for the World Economic Forum. This is a question for Mr. Bergen. You've rightly mentioned that Asia is looking to contribute as much as 50% of the global economy this year. Are there any prospects of senior leaders from both the US and China meeting in Singapore? And what do you think would be on the agenda? Will there be a possibility for more reapproachment towards to smooth over the trade issues that have been building up over the past 2 to 3 years?
Thanks for that. And Burger, you've already announced at the beginning that President Xi Jinping will be commencing the meeting, and that we'll have Secretary Kerry joining too. What are the prospects in Singapore of us bringing more leaders together to carry on the conversations that are starting next week with Davos Agenda Week?
No, thank you so much. And again, also thank you to the government of Singapore that we have worked so closely together with to make this happen in May. Our ambition is to also bring the key leaders of the world together in Singapore, as we're doing now in the Davos Agenda Week. And I think on Asia, we probably cannot do better because we have all the key Asian leaders there. But we will, of course, also then in Singapore add Indonesia and other big economies in Asia. We also are in excellent dialogue with the incoming US administration. I think it's a bit early to identify who possibly will participate, but we know there's a keen interest both from China and the US to find paths on how to collaborate in the future. We know that China and the US is almost 50% of the global GDP together. So, of course, there will be challenges also moving forward, but together with the EU and Asia in a broader context, I do hope that we can come together and at least talk to each other and find common solutions, because all the problems that we have discussed so far in the press conference are problems and challenges that don't know any borders. Climate change doesn't know borders. Covet, we know, doesn't know any kind of borders. So we have to deal with it in a very collaborative way. And then trust is the basis of all this. We have to rebuild trust in each other. And there, I think also Davos Agenda Week next week will be a very good moment to also take stock of where we're doing economically. Kristalina Georgieva, the head of IMF, will be there. She also underlines that we still need stimulus, but we also need a path out of this crisis. Christine Lagarde will also be with us next week. I also expect the key economic leaders of the world to be with us in Singapore because they will play such an important role.
Thank you, Birger. We have Catherine Cheney, I think, probably the last question we have time for in this briefing. Catherine, your question. Hoping to get Catherine. Perhaps we can have Laurie from Thomson Reuters.
Hi, this is Laurie from Thomson Reuters Foundation.
Hi, Laurie.
And Sadia said that we can't simply return to economic growth as it existed in the past, and that we need a lot more on sustainability and inclusion to make this work. I know we've talked about that, but that seems a big jump from just returning to the growth-focused economy that we had before. Do you have any really concrete plans about how you're going to address this and what this new dashboard she talked about might look like?
Thanks for that, Laurie. And I think I'll call on both Sadia and perhaps also Sarita Nayar in New York just to address that, because Sarita works very closely with some of our key partners in helping to do that. Sadia first.
So I think actually perhaps the best placed person is Professor Klaus Schwab with the focus of the book. One aspect is changing our metrics, and one set of those metrics are for business, and the work on ESG metrics, that's been a big part of what we've done in 2020 and will continue over the coming year. That's one big piece of it. The dashboard for the new economy is something that we actually already released last year in October at what we call the Jobs Reset Summit. It's part of what we need as the new compass for economies. And then there's the piece on around policy. And that's where I referred to the work on economic growth, revival, and transformation. And again, we've have 40 years of experience on focusing on what is needed for the competitiveness of economies. And that's where in December, we actually launched a new proposal which looks at how ready countries are for this kind of future economic transformation. And over the course of 2021, we're working with multiple economies, including those that are actually experimenting with some of these new policies, to see how you put in place new green markets, how you put in place markets for social safety nets, how you embed better education systems, and how you do all of this in a way that is market-based and combines public and private sector collaboration. So more to come on this, but quite a bit of work underway, and I can refer you to that.
Thanks. And Sarita, how keen are businesses, in your experience, to actually do the kind of hard work that's required to putting these ideas into practice?
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. So business, of course, is definitely at the table. We talked about the trust factor and people having more trust in business. They have definitely experienced through this last year more than ever the importance of the stakeholder theory that Professor Schwab had talked about, and they have made tremendous amount of commitments to say that they are ready and willing to engage on it. So related to that, Sadia mentioned the ESG, the environmental, social, and governance areas. And we know that we have many organizations at the senior-most level, over 100, who are working with us to really create these new metrics around ESG, to bring some consistency around having these metrics be comparable, measurable, compatible, and consistent across all various industry sectors. They, of course, span governance, planet, and people. So many of the things that Sadia just mentioned, there is high level of commitment, and I think at the Davos Agenda Week, there will be some formal announcement as well in terms of where business wants to play a role on this.
Thank you, Sarita. And just to draw us to a close, I want to return to Professor Klaus Schwab, our founder and executive chairman. Klaus, when you founded this organization just over 50 years ago, you probably, one, didn't imagine you'd be able to do it virtually by computer, but also probably not be able to predict the incredible array of global leaders that you're able to convene. What are your personal expectations for Davos Agenda Week as we look forward to it?
No, we have a great responsibility. And of course, when we look at all those issues, people may ask, how can the forum be engaged into so many different topics? And of course, I could respond, it's not only the forum, it's all our communities which are engaged. But what we can contribute is a systemic view, because all those issues we talked about in some way are interconnected. And we cannot create to very complex issues very simple answers. We have to create answers which are really holistic, where we consider the economic, the social, the technological, and the environmental aspects simultaneously. If I would leave you with two thoughts, what is very close to my heart, and of course, it's the environment, it's the World Economic Forum, being involved in, let's say, more environmental responsibility practically since the beginning of its existence. But the other, and I come back to a question, I think what we absolutely have to avoid is the bipolarization of society. If we do not address issues of the people who have lost livelihood, if we do not address the issue of, let's say, the impact of the fourth industrial revolution on jobs and so on, we will move even more into a polarized society. And if we have a polarized society, we cannot re-establish trust. So what we want to do is to address not the symptoms, we want to address the causes for the situation we are in today. And that's what the Davos Agenda Week is serving for, what Singapore is serving for, what all we have to make sure, and that's the reason why I said it's a mobilization year. We have to make sure that everybody first moves out of this crisis mood and has reason to do so, and adopts again a constructive future mindset. And second, we have to make sure that everybody contributes to rebuilding, to resetting our world. So thank you for participation, and of course, looking forward to have all of you participating next week. Back to you, Adrian.
Klaus, thank you very much. On behalf of all the colleagues here in New York and around the world, and from the forum, a big thank you. If you want any background reading for Davos Agenda Week. We haven't got an audio book yet, but you can see copies of Stakeholder Capitalism will be coming shortly to online and offline bookstores soon. There's also weforum.org, where you can catch up with all the latest and find out how to follow the Davos Agenda Week online. Be you on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, there'll be ways to follow, and YouTube too. There'll be ways to follow the meeting and make sure that you can really participate in some of the discussions that are going to shape the year ahead. So from all of my colleagues and from us here at the World Economic Forum, big thank you. See you next week.